I had a consultation with a parent about a 6-year-old child who was struggling with perfectionism. One of the ways that we saw it was that they were struggling to take instruction from an authority figure, and they got insulted when they felt that they weren't perfect. He was lashing out when he was failing, and it was affecting his work ethic. He didn't want to push himself, and so he started preferring to be kept in the easy phases of activity so that he could avoid growing pains. How does perfectionism develop? Black and white thinking means that an autistic person will see success or failure as absolute. That leads to distress if outcomes are not perfect. Getting the gifted label adds pressure because early praises for being smart can backfire. Children may avoid risk to preserve their identity. They want to hold on to the identity as gifted, so they will resist challenges because they have a fear of failure. So here are some signs and effects. When you see that the individual is lashing out or withdrawing when they're facing tasks that they perceive as difficult or risky, that is a sign that they are anxious about these imperfections. If you see low motivation and refusal to try tasks that aren't guaranteed successes, we are having difficulty with change in attitude about a growth mindset. And then finally, avoiding growth or avoiding the hard part of the learning, that will lead to stagnation or burnout. Here are some evidence-based strategies to shift towards a growth mindset. First of all, you must praise the effort, not the outcome. So you focus your feedback on their persistence and their strategies and their progress. One example I use in piano lessons is, you see, you got your thumb out of the way because you knew you had to cross over finger 2. That type of feedback is praise for what they have done that is toward an outcome. I'm not praising the outcome of, good job, you finished song number 3. Next, you should model your own experiences with mistakes and discuss it so that the individual can learn from it. By modeling how you make a mistake or what I have learned from it, helps the individual take away the focus from their own mistakes and focus on how others have opportunities to grow from their experiences. For example, when I share how I struggled to pass my GED exam, I tell people, did you know you can take the GED exam every 60 days for the rest of your life? People don't know that. That helps them understand that passing or failing isn't a mistake, but it is an opportunity to learn and grow. And finally, to explicitly teach that mistakes are expected and that it is part of how growth happens helps the individual see that growing up or adulting is a natural and beautiful process. Let's talk about gradual exposure to challenges. When you introduce small, manageable challenges, you are celebrating the successful adaptations and not the perfection of mastery. So for example, something that's small and manageable is to put on footwear before we leave the house. The adaptation that is successful is, you chose Crocs. Good job, your feet are now covered, we are safe to go outside. We're not talking about how perfect the task was completed. We're talking about how the individual adapted to the job at hand. You also must structure the tasks so that there's constant opportunities for partial success. It's not making baby steps. It's so that you can let the child learn to tolerate manageable frustrations. In the example of we need to get out, so how are you going to make a structured opportunity for partial success? You're going to put the calendar in front of them and say, we need to get to Target for X, Y, and Z. And so we could do Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, you choose. You're breaking it down into parts that they can manage. Choosing the day makes it manageable. You need to also instill coping skills for emotional regulation. Yes, you can teach deep breathing, but also show how you take breaks and model how you do positive self-talk, because that will help the individual handle anxiety around imperfections or failures. When grown-ups show that they make mistakes but they don't call themselves stupid, that is the beginning of teaching emotional regulation. At the same time, you want to validate their emotions because you need to help them label their feelings. You must emphasize that feeling upset about a mistake is normal but manageable. You can't teach coping skills and emotional regulation by lecturing. You must show how you do that every single day when you make mistakes and how your response is normal by feeling upset. Put a label to the emotion. Normalize emotional response, not stress response. My experience with my own autistic children was that when I maintained predictable routines, the structure allowed them the flexibility to make choices or changes. So if you know that 7 a.m. is, breakfast, you can avoid it, you can be anxious about it, but at the same time, there's wiggle room where you can discuss it and say, well, if we're not going to be home for this and this time and we're going to go to sleep late, can we do breakfast at 7:30? Absolutely. Let's make flex options because structure and predictability opens up room for growth and change. If you're planning to make a change in a routine or a structure or a schedule, you must provide advanced notice to prepare for this transition. What the advanced notice does is it offers a safe space for the individual to calm down after something distressful. That completely shifts the rigidity into a growth mindset. Let's talk about the family and school collaboration. We must be in an educational setting that fosters our strengths and interests, that provides safe outlets so we can excel, but at the same time supports risk-taking in new areas. If your child is locked in special education, they are being exposed to below age appropriate subject matter. How are you going to have academic and intellectual development without enrichment opportunities, without literacy exposure? That is a stressful setting. It's really important to collaborate with the teachers to make sure that accommodations do both. They support the giftedness and the autistic traits, which, we are stereotyping on black and white thinking, but at the same time, we also must include scaffolding for frustration tolerance as well as self-advocacy skills. A student who gets support only for their weaknesses is not going to be able to tolerate frustration because self-advocacy is marginalized. The worst thing you could do when an individual self-advocates is to tell them that they have to try harder. If school turns into a stressful encounter and not an educational opportunity, then the first thing you should do is make connections with other families, other twice exceptional families, other autism moms, because you must gain a deeper understanding about support networks. We're here to help each other. We, the autistic people, though, are the experts on autism. I am autistic and I consider myself an autism expert. I'm autistic and I have gifts in many special areas. However, those don't help me with my autistic traits. And I always need to have my supports in place to make sure that I thrive. These neuroaffirming supports are proactive to help a twice exceptional autistic child who has perfectionism to shift their focus toward the effort and the learning, and it gives them the emotional tools and gives you instruction on how to design environments that allow for safe, guided risk-taking. This is how we build resilience, self-compassion, and genuine motivation to grow.